Thank you for taking the time to view our session today, Climate Catastrophe to Climate Opportunity. Today, you'll hear from those working in the advocacy community, working with community stakeholders, and even working in the White House to develop and implement policies necessary to take aggressive action to tackle climate change. The cost of not doing so are stark. 250,000 deaths worldwide per year beginning in the next decade, and the potential loss of nearly 10% of the United States GDP by the middle of the century. But the impacts of the climate crisis are already here, with $95 billion in damages to go, with numerous lost lives and untold suffering from climate and weather disasters in our nation just last year. You know, in his Ripple of Hope speech, Robert Kennedy quoted an Italian philosopher as saying, "There's nothing more difficult than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things." And that's the challenge we face, creating a new order of things. And it is the challenge that we must meet. But taking action will not just avert the worst impacts of climate change. Taking action will give us an opportunity to create millions of good paying, high quality jobs that can rebuild our economy from the middle out and repair the legacy of environmental pollution that has burdened low income communities, tribal and indigenous communities, and communities of color for decades. Fortunately, after years of destructive anti-environmental policies, those of us concerned with this crisis have a White House and a Congress to match. The Biden administration has already begun taking executive action to tackle the climate crisis at home and abroad and begin the transition towards a zero carbon economy. This is critical. This is important work. And I'm so proud to have a former staff member in my office, Corey Solo, who's left us and gone on to greater and bigger things at the White House, helping to undertake that. You'll hear from her today. In Congress, I'm working with my colleagues to advance legislation that, if signed into law, would result in net zero greenhouse pollution no later than 2050, with reductions of 50% targeted by the end of the 2020s. I've introduced the Environmental Justice Legacy Pollution Cleanup Act with my friend and fellow CBC member, Senator Cory Booker, to eliminate legacy pollution that has disproportionately impacted our communities. But that's what is truly key, and that's why we're taking this opportunity to create a new order of things, to set our nation up to achieve a goal of zero emissions, and that we are able to take advantage of the opportunities to do so. Pardon me. You will hear today on actions already being done by the Biden administration. You'll hear from those in the advocacy community as to what steps need to be taken to truly take that next step in facing this challenge. And you will hear from community leaders on how we must take action to ensure that we leave no community behind. I'm truly looking forward to the discussion today. We have a terrific panel assembled. And I appreciate all you all taking the time to listen to this discussion. I appreciate the panelists. And you know what? It seems like I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Donald McEachin, and I have the privilege of representing Virginia's 4th Congressional District. Enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Congressman. I'm Don Calloway, Vice President of Equity, Inclusion, and Impact. I'm also a regular contributor to MSNBC on politics and general cool things happening throughout our world. I am so proud and always happy to be in service to the Congressional Black Caucus, indeed the conscience of the United States Congress. I will always be indebted to the Congressional Black Caucus for giving me a start in Washington, D.C. as an intern in the class of 2001. Start with the CBC and go anywhere, and I'm proud to be a living witness to that. I'm also proud to be in service to the honorable, the resilient Congressman from Virginia's 4th Congressional District, my friend, my namesake, Congressman Donald McEachin. He has put in decades of public service, and we are so proud that he represents us here, not only in the United States Congress, but in the Mid-Atlantic region. There is no greater congressional champion of climate change and addressing the urgency of now when it comes to climate than Don McEachin. So I'm proud to be with you again, my brother. We have a dynamic panel, all women panel, subject matter experts to discuss what is probably the most pressing crisis facing us, not only as Americans, but as global citizens. That is the climate crisis. It's been 17 years since Al Gore introduced us to the climate, many of us to the climate crisis within his film, his seminal film, An Inconvenient Truth. So there's no further debate. Partisanship aside, there's no further debate that climate is real. The question is, what do we do about it? And we're very lucky here today to hear from some subject matter experts. The Biden administration, as Congressman said, has pledged to take action. So the time for inaction is over. But action is broad. What does it really mean? Everyone has a role. Citizens have a role. NGOs have a role. Congress has a role. And indeed, the White House has a role. And we're very excited today to have the opportunity to hear from subject matter experts and representatives from each of those silos. And hopefully we can all walk away with a better understanding of the climate crisis, but also, far more importantly, a better understanding of what we can do from where we are to address the climate crisis. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce our dynamic panel, let each one of them give a brief opening statement, and then we're going to get to some questions and hopefully a pretty robust discussion with the balance of our time. First off, an alumni of Congressman McEachin's office, as you all heard, our proud representative of the White House, Corey Solo. Corey is the Deputy Director for Environmental Justice at the White House Council on Environmental Quality. She's a Capitol Hill veteran with over a decade of advising multiple House members. I won't say what party because we're supposed to be nonpartisan here, but she is a veteran of Capitol Hill, and y'all can guess what side she's been on. Most recently, she served as Deputy Chief of Staff to our host here, Congressman McEachin. But at the heart of her work is a commitment to stand alongside overburdened and underserved communities to advance an equitable and just climate policy. So, Corey Solo from the White House, representing President Biden and Vice President Harris. No pressure. It's on you.
Thank you so much, John, for that kind introduction, and a very special thank you to our honorary host and obviously my very important and special former boss, Congressman McEachin, and his staff for convening this forum to discuss the plans and policies required to address our climate crisis and its impact on overburdened and underserved communities. I'm honored to be with you all to discuss my work and in the Biden administration's work to support a whole of government approach to environmental justice. Before I get into the specifics of what the Biden administration is doing, I do want to take a moment to talk about how we got here. As the Congressman talked about for far too long, communities of color, low-income communities, Indigenous people, or members of tribal nations across our country have been disproportionately harmed by exposure to environmental pollutants, unsustainable energy systems, underinvestment in infrastructure and services, and the degradation of nature. The human toll of this inequality is shown in the disproportionately high rates of asthma among Black Americans, disproportionately high rates of lead poisoning in children of color, and other unacceptable disparities. Simply put, for too many people, the places where they live, work, play, and learn are neither safe nor healthy. And too often, these same communities are left out of the decision-making process or the last to be included in the transition to a healthy, resilient, and sustainable future. President Biden has made it clear that his administration will chart a new and better course, one that incorporates equity and justice for historically overburdened and underserved communities throughout the administration's policy initiatives. President Biden is committed to securing environmental justice and spurring economic opportunity for communities that have been historically marginalized and overburdened by pollution, and underinvestment in housing, transportation, water and wastewater infrastructure, and healthcare. Correcting these historic wrongs will require a long-term commitment, and I'm incredibly proud of the steps already taken by this administration, including the creation of the first ever White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, made up of 26 longtime environmental justice advocates, researchers, experts, and practitioners from across the country. Over the course of 2 short months, this advisory council held 3 public meetings and devoted countless hours days and nights to develop recommendations to support the federal government's efforts to address current and historic environmental injustice. This advisory council is just one part of the Biden administration's commitment to environmental justice. We know that we must take a holistic look at the impacts of our policy choices. And because of this, the president has also established the White House Environmental Justice Interagency Council. The council, which is composed of over a dozen agencies and offices, is tasked with developing and implementing the federal government strategy to address environmental injustice by consulting with the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council and with local environmental justice leaders. The Interagency Council will also help develop clear performance metrics to ensure accountability and publish an annual performance scorecard on its implementation. But it doesn't stop there. My colleagues at CEQ are working with every single agency to take a whole of government approach to pursue environmental justice while addressing climate change. We're working to update Executive Order 12898, implement the Justice 40 initiative, and much more. As you can see, there is no doubt a busy time discussing more of the Biden administration's bold, historic work during our question and answer session. Thank you again, Don.
Thank you so much, Corey. We're so pleased to have you. We look forward to hearing more from you and all of our panelists here in just a minute. Next up is Yvonne McIntyre. Yvonne is the Director of Federal Electricity and Utility Policy at the Natural Resources Defense Council. She's responsible for development and advocacy of NRDC's federal power sector, climate change policies, clean air, and clean energy policies. In addition, she works with NRDC's Sustainable FERC project on federal legislative policies and priorities. Throughout her career, Yvonne has worked extensively on issues relating to national energy policy, electricity markets, natural gas, climate change, Clean Air Act, renewable energy tech, and tax incentives. Yvonne McIntyre, you have the floor.
Thank you, Don, and thank you, Congressman McEachin and staff for inviting me to participate in this panel today. I'm excited to share NRDC's views and policies on tackling the climate crisis and addressing the equity issues. NRDC was founded in 1970 as an international nonprofit organization of scientists, lawyers, and environmental specialists dedicated to protecting public health and the environment. Our focus on tackling the climate crisis is at its source, pollution from fossil fuels. We work to reduce our dependence on these dirty resources by expanding clean energy across cities, states, and nations. We get involved in court cases and also developing policies that allow the federal government, state, and local entities to limit carbon pollution from various fossil fuel resources. We are fighting to ensure that these resources do not pump out any more pollution. And that will address a lot of the historic inequities that the pollution has engaged on or had an impact on in low-income communities and communities of color. As you discussed my past background, I have 30 years working in the power sector, first as an engineer and then as a government affairs executive. And so throughout those years, I've worked in a community that has really initially didn't take climate change seriously, then really just did it for political concerns of, okay, we're going to make some volunteer commitments to stave off political mandates and government mandates. But it has been really interesting in the past 5 to 10 years that these entities are really coming to the table now and really see the impact that climate change is having on their own infrastructure and making commitments that are credible, and they really want to be at the table to engage on what we can do and the policies to move forward. And so it's been a good kind of career trajectory for me to have been on the one side and now working with my former colleagues to bring them along and forming good policy to really address climate change crisis and take action going forward. So again, thank you, and I look forward to sharing more of NRDC's and my views later in the panel.
Thank you, Yvonne. We look forward to hearing more from you and the NRDC. And next is Sarah Chifo, the Vice President of Government Affairs at the venerable, the respected League of Conservation Voters. As the LCV's Vice President of Government Affairs, Sarah works to advance their federal legislative and administrative goals with a specific focus on climate change and energy policy. Her work spans legislative strategy, executive branch advocacy, coalition building, elections, and comms. She serves as LCV's senior rep on the Climate Action Campaign, the Blue-Green Alliance, and the Equitable and Just National Climate Forum. Since joining the League of Conservation Voters in 2009, she's also helped lead the production of LCV's National Environmental Scorecard, which for almost 50 years has been the nationally accepted yardstick used to rate members of Congress on environmental and energy issues. The Chief, Sarah, take it away.
Don, thank you for that kind introduction. You can do my intro anytime. It is a true honor to be here. Again, I'm Sarah Chieffo. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs, and I'm now going to call it the Venerable League of Conservation Voters. Thank you for that hat tip, Don. It is just a true honor to be here with you all today and to be talking about this all-important crisis and opportunity. And huge thank you to the CBC Foundation for hosting this panel as part of your annual legislative conference. And before I jump into a little bit more about my background and how I come to this work and LCV's priorities, let me just echo the huge thank you to Congressman Keechan. We could not have a better advocate and champion in the halls of Congress for climate and environmental justice. And the team he has working for him is incredible, as Corey is testament. So again, the League of Conservation Voters works to build political power for people on the planet. We work to influence policy, and we also work to hold politicians accountable, as Don said, with our scorecard being a major way we do that. We work closely with a network of over 30 state partners across the country. Our very top priority is solving the climate crisis in a manner that addresses racial and economic injustice. We believe deeply that a functioning and fair democracy, access to voting, and engaged citizens are essential to making and sustaining this transformational progress that we must make. With the Biden-Harris administration and the pro-climate leadership of the United States House and United States Senate, we now have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to make truly historic progress on climate change through a combination of strong standards and investments that center justice. This includes justice for Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color and low-wealth communities who have borne the brunt of fossil fuel pollution and systemic racism, and justice for the workers and the communities who are impacted by the rapid shift that we are and must continue to speed up and make from fossil fuels to truly clean and pollution-free energy sources. LCV and our state partners are all in to work with this administration and Congress to swiftly pass transformative economic recovery legislation that meets the scale of these multiple crises that we face. We are running one of the biggest advocacy campaigns in our organization's 40-year history. We've partnered with more than 30 state affiliates. We've got 86 organizers across 8 key states. We've knocked on over 60,000 doors. We've got 6,000 climate action yard signs across the country. We've engaged 1,400 businesses, all calling for climate action now with good jobs and justice. We've also got 10 million nationwide in an ad campaign across TV, digital, radio, video, billboards, and local newspaper ads. We've held over 40 events with members of Congress like Congressman Keechan, and we've mobilized local elected officials, including a letter with 1,400 local electeds calling for the bold investments that their communities need to build back better with climate ambition, clean energy justice, and equity at its core. The good news is the public and voters overwhelmingly support this agenda, which has been modeled after success we've seen in states across the country to really make historic progress over the last several years on climate change, as you heard from Congressman Keechan, as the former administration has shirked their responsibilities. The pandemic, it's worth noting, is still with us, and it has hit our society and our economy hard. And it has hit women and workers of color the hardest. Millions of people are still out of work, and many more are underemployed or unable to go back to work for lack of care and access to childcare. One of the best chances we have to recover and build a more fair and just society is through creating these millions of high quality, good paying union jobs within and beyond the clean energy sector. As LCV works to seize this historic moment, we've been focused on 3 top priorities: putting the US on the path to 100% carbon-free energy powering our electricity grid, our transportation, our buildings. Second, putting climate and justice at the center of what we do and making sure that these investments live up to the Justice 40 commitment, so 40% of investment benefits flow to low-income and communities of color. And third, to make sure that we're supporting high-quality, good-paying union jobs so that people can raise a family and provide a good quality of life for their kids. We know that economic inequality and the climate crisis are deeply interrelated. It's going to take a powerful movement and partnerships to get this done. especially with the narrow congressional majorities that we have and the entrenched fossil fuel industry's opposition. LCB is deeply committed to working with partners here on this panel and across a broad cross-section of climate, labor, and environmental justice leaders to get the job done. And I've never been more optimistic about our ability to seize this moment. Thank you, Don.
You got it. Thank you, Sarah. Looking so much forward to hearing more from you over the course of the afternoon. Dana Johnson. Dana is the director of the Federal Policy Office at We Act for Environmental Justice. Dana is an innovative leader with almost 20 years of strategic communications experience. Currently, she's at We Act for Environmental Justice, having previously served as the communications manager, but now is the director of the Federal Policy Office. She has worked for cause-driven nonprofits and full-service communication firms and engaged in work that has advocated for access and built real connections through cultural competence initiatives, integrated communications campaigns, and operational excellence strategies. Dana has worked with organizations and clients in the consumer research, education, fitness, hospitality, public health, transportation, and any other industry. A 10-tool player, Dana Johnson from We Act for Environmental Justice. Take it away, Dana.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate that introduction and the reminder of how many spheres of industry I've touched. I want to thank the Congressional Black Caucus, as well as thank Congressman McEachin for inviting We Act for Environmental Justice to be represented in this conversation. It's really wonderful to be with you all today to talk about the restoration of our federal climate leadership and how it is inextricably tied to environmental justice. We Act for Environmental Justice was founded more than 30 years ago in response to overt environmental racism that was impacting our community in West Harlem, New York, where we are headquartered. Since then, we have grown into an organization that has a presence in Washington, D.C. We have a national reputation within the environmental justice movement. And we also do that through the convening of the Environmental Justice Leadership Forum, which is an alliance of a little over 50 environmental justice organizations across this country, representing 22 states, including those that are represented by members of the Congressional Black Caucus. Finally, We Act was one of the first people of color-led organizations in New York State. And we are, as I mentioned earlier, we are the only environmental justice organization that has a permanent presence here in Washington, D.C. In thinking about some of the early action that we believe Congress and our federal government should take, and I think that we will talk about today, when we think about the climate crises and our response to environmental justice, we believe that the passage of policies and practices that are related to equity and justice must be tangible. They must be at the heart of what we do. We believe that there is a need for us to address legacy harms and legacy pollution. And we see Justice 40 and other whole of government approaches by this administration as being the vehicle with which to do that. But we also have a responsibility to ensure that those benefits are realized within communities. And so we think that there is an effort to work, there is a need to work locally as well as at the state level to ensure that there is awareness and engagement of community, and that we need to think differently about how resources are delivered and accessed. And we believe that we have a role and responsibility in doing that. And then I think the final place where we are working is we are sure or clear that the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated to us that the impact of environmental injustices is holistic, and that we need to take a holistic approach to it, we think about or have conversations, national conversations about how we might prioritize this work. But we believe that this moment requires an all hands on deck approach. And we look forward to being a part of that conversation and helping to lead in solutions that we believe will benefit our communities and center the needs of impacted groups in the solutions that we arrive at. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dana. Harlem, stand up. I did not know that We Act was based in Harlem, but we look forward to hearing more from you all in our question and answer. And lastly, running the anchor leg since it's the Olympic season, there is always a word from the Lord. And bringing that word today is the great, the Reverend Dr. Faith Harris. She is the co-director of Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. Dr. Harris has been highly active in the Richmond community for more than 10 years. She's currently a member of the Standing Together Steering Committee of the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities and a member of Governor Ralph Northam's Environmental Justice Advisory Council for Governor Terry McAuliffe and Ralph Northam, Dr. Harris is also an assistant professor of theological studies for the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union. She teaches courses in the study of systematic eco-theology and womanist feminist theologies employing activism and community engagement in ministry. She's the director for the Johnson A. Edosamwin Center for Faith, Leadership, and Public Life at STVU, which convenes workshops, panel discussions, town halls, and amongst other events to facilitate deeper and meaningful student and community engagement and dialogue related to theology and public and civic policy. That was a mouthful, but we are going to hear a word today. Great Reverend Dr. Faith Harris.
Thank you, Don. I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this really impressive panel of smart women and smart men too. Virginia Interfaith Power and Light collaborates among people of faith and conscience to grow healthy communities by advancing climate and environmental justice. And I have been a member of and working for the organization for only a year, but I was chair of the organization for 4 years prior. And I just want to quote a great hero of mine, and I'm sure of many others. In 1982, African-American civil rights leader Benjamin Chavis spoke of environmental racism. He described it as racial discrimination in environmental policymaking, the enforcement of regulations and laws, the deliberate targeting of communities of color for toxic waste facilities, the official sanctioning of the life-threatening presence of poisons and pollutants in our communities, and the history of excluding people of color for leadership in the ecology movements. His statement really speaks to a lot of the work that Virginia IPL does and the things that we're concerned about. And Virginia IPL is one affiliate of the national IPL, and we are based in Virginia, obviously. And so get to look at what environmental racism looks like in Virginia. We have, for example, I'll give you 3 examples. We have 2 frac gas plants proposed for one small county, Charles City County, where 44% of the residents are Black and 7% are Indigenous. One of those, I'm happy to say, has been canceled. But this county also has a landfill, and it is one of the low wealth community counties in the state. In the east end of Newport News, where the majority of residents are Black, rail shipments of coal and Interstate 664 slice through the neighborhood. Asthma, heart disease, chronic lower respiratory disease, death rates are higher than any other areas of the peninsula and the health district in the state of Virginia. In January of 2020, it took the U.S. Court of Appeals to throw out the 8th Dominion energy permit for a fracked gas compressor and pipeline planned to go through Union Hill, a historically Black community in Buckingham County. Those are just 3 examples of the way that environmental racism shows up in Virginia. In short, if you are poor, if you are a person of color, if you are disadvantaged in any way, you are very likely to suffer the most as a result of environmental degradation. So African American communities have become frontline communities who disproportionately suffer the burden of climate change. And the New York Times in August of 2020 had an article that was titled "Decades of Racist Housing Policy Left Neighborhoods Sweltering." And the article reviews research linking environmental health disparities in the city of Richmond with the historic racist practice of redlining, a 20th century practice by federal and local officials, as well as banks and realtors. Redlining reinforced racial segregation in cities and diverted investments from minority neighborhoods. Today, the scars of this form of systematic racism appear as ongoing inequities suffered by Black communities in Richmond and across our nation, including disparities in urban heat environment. This administration is promised to make a difference on these issues and to actually turn around the trajectory by investing at least 40% of all infrastructure monies in these communities. And that's what we're fighting for. We are fighting for these communities to get their fair share and to be able to attain some level of equity along with the rest of the nation as we all together work to resist and to mitigate the issues and the impacts related to the climate crisis. So we have to ensure that the wonders of our natural world are sustainable and that they are, carried out and that they are stewarded in an equitable manner. So to address the cost of abusing the earth, Black and Brown communities should not suffer more burden than other communities. We do so to protect the earth. We do so by taking measures to listen carefully to the cry of the earth, the peoples who suffer the most from climate change and environmental degradation. Pope Francis said it best in his encyclical From Laudato Si. We have to realize that a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice in debates on the environment so as to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor.
Thank you so much, Reverend Harris. Now, we have a series of questions, and we're going to try to run through these relatively quickly because I know that there's a lot of great points that all of you all have already contributed and can get out going forward. I'm going to start with you, Yvonne McIntyre from NRDC. You've got 30 years in the game, although you don't look like it, but you have had a holistic look at all of these issues from the private sector, as a public advocate, an engineer, as well as a policy person. So you've got a new Congress, you've got a new administration, you got new governors, state legislatures, and they have taken action, executive and legislative, to address climate over the course of these last several months of the new administration. But with so many different crises facing us all and so many different things that need to be addressed, what should the Biden administration, but not only the administration, all of our policymakers, what should they prioritize as we look at the urgency of the matter and something that they can get done right now?
Wow, that's a tough question. So what we need to focus on is understanding that by addressing the climate crisis, you are also addressing a lot of these other issues that we have raised so far. So jobs and clean energy development and addressing equity issues. That can all be done all in one package, basically, and so, what we're looking at is, investments in clean energy deployment, investments in job training to go along with that transitioning to new clean energy resources. And so, and then with an eye towards developing clean energy projects in disadvantaged communities, communities of color, low-income communities. focusing job training programs in those communities and communities that are transitioning from fossil fuel resource heavy communities into a clean energy community. And so we're looking at different types of legislation right now, and I will let Sarah go into kind of describing the legislative process here. But we started with the president making a commitment with the American Jobs Plan and now Build Back Better, and those components of those proposals are being translated into legislative solutions that will touch on a lot of these issues and address these issues as we are advocating to ensure that they are addressing the equity issues, jobs issues, and training issues. So I will turn over to Sarah to talk specifically about what the legislative packages are on the table.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. And I couldn't agree more with this opportunity that we have. So as Yvonne said, we have a historic opportunity to tackle these interrelated crises, the crises of the climate change and economic and racial injustice. And at the heart of the action that Congress must take is this bold and transformative investments agenda with equity and justice at its core. So at League of Conservation Voters, we're working with many partners to push congressional leaders to swiftly pass legislation that meets the scale of science and justice. From a climate perspective, these investments must put us on the path to cutting climate pollution in half within the United States by 2030. That's the science-based goal the president has committed us to in the context of the global climate negotiations. And these investments have a really powerful and synergistic combination with the executive branch actions that they can take under existing law through their existing authority, as you heard Corey talk about at the beginning of this session, and really combined with state and local leadership in really powerful ways. From a procedural standpoint, it is LCV's strong belief that we need to do this through budget reconciliation, which only takes 50 votes in the United States Senate, because unfortunately, congressional Republicans, and I distinguish here between congressional Republicans and those Republicans across the country or in state legislatures who have at the United States congressional level have proven time and again, they're unwilling to act at the scale we must on the climate crisis. So when we look at this reconciliation package, we are really focused on investments that achieve that 100% carbon-free energy powering our electricity grid, our new cars and buses and trucks and buildings by 2035. We're focused on two main policy drivers in that space. One is a really robust combination of tax policies that deploy clean energy, as Yvonne said, that speed the adoption of electric vehicles and make them more affordable, and trucks, that help support transmission build out to make sure we have the ability to get clean energy from where it's produced, often in very rural areas, into heavy population areas. Storage, so that we've got a better way to get rid of sort of peaker plants, for example, and store long duration of cleaner energy sources, and investing in clean energy manufacturing to make sure we're building the clean energy economy here, while we're also investing in making our buildings and our homes more energy efficient and electrifying our appliances. The second main policy we're really focused on, Don, here is a clean electricity performance program that it combines with the tax policies to make sure that we hit 80% clean energy by 2030, putting us on the path to carbon-free and ideally pollution-free energy by 2035. A recent study out of Harvard showed that that policy would deliver 1.8 trillion with a T, trillion in climate and health benefits, while also helping protect ratepayers. This reconciliation package also must center equity and justice for those low-income communities, communities of color, as we've talked about, who have been most harmed by the legacy of toxic pollution, redlining, and systemic racism. This package has to meet the President's Justice 40 commitment to deliver 40% of investment benefits to those most impacted communities. And we're looking at a really broad range of investments here that we've touched on already, but let me just recap. Investments in building pollution-free and healthy communities, homes and schools, delivering clean water for all, making sure that we're eliminating diesel from our goods movement and transportation systems. Really important workforce development training programs centered on these communities, sustainable and affordable housing, low-income assistance for paying our water and electricity bills, more urban green space, and so much more. These investments are essential not just to hit a number of 40%, but really to close the racial wealth gap that has existed for decades and far too long in the United States, and to ensure that every community can thrive and we finally clean up this legacy of toxic pollution. These investments, as we've already touched on, really should be paired with support for communities who are transitioning away from fossil fuels and with additional investments in adaptation and natural resource solutions. And we have to undo the really wrong-headed policy of opening up the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge from drilling. We know, as I said earlier, Dawn, this is a really popular agenda, and especially popular with young voters, young people, and communities of color who are seeing these impacts right now in communities across their country and want action. As Congressman said, inaction is not an option.
Sarah, that's a lot, but I am so proud to hear someone say, let's look at reconciliation and let's not let 60 votes in the Senate be a barrier to something that's so important. I'm going to go back to Corey Solo from the White House for just a moment. Corey, we heard from Yvonne McIntyre on this. We're going to ask you, as a representative of the White House, no pressure, what should President Biden prioritize as we consider executive action that can be taken to curb the climate crisis over the course of his 4 years remaining in office?
Well, thank you so much for that question, Don. And I am incredibly proud that President Biden has taken immediate and bold and historic executive action since he entered the White House in January, including issuing Executive Order 14008 on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad, which put forth many of the initiatives that we are talking about today, including the Justice 40 initiative, which Sarah just talked about, and the importance of ensuring that the benefits of investments reach historically disadvantaged communities. I would just say that the president has put forward a big, bold agenda that is going to that requires a long-term commitment to be thinking about how we move forward today and in the future. And we are working incredibly hard each and every day to make good on those commitments, to make tangible changes in communities across the country. And we know that he started off strong, and that's where we are going to continue to go. So thank you so much for that question.
You got it. Thank you, Corey. Reverend Faith, with the time we have left, I'm going to try to run through this, but you are the person who is calling us all to conscience here today. And environmental justice, we know who it affects worse. BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities who have long since faced the brunt of the worst of all of the pandemics who have that have plagued our country since its inception. President Biden recently issued interim guidance to implement the Justice 40 initiative to make good on the administration's efforts to promise to deliver at least 40% of the overall benefits from federal investments in climate and clean energy to disadvantaged communities. This is the space that you specifically work in and have substantial expertise in. So what can we expect to see, or what can we hope to see as this administration continues to take steps towards a broad picture of environmental justice and ending environmental racism?
So thank you for that question. I really, because we work on the ground with people every day, and because we work also in with our General Assembly and advocacy, and we try to work with the state agencies that are tasked to implement these policies and programs. One of the things that we find extremely frustrating is that there will be really great legislation. There will be great money invested and set aside. But when it comes to the implementation, there always are these loopholes that end up not getting the money to the people on the ground where it is actually needed. And I think what I would hope to see, and it certainly is not only on the doorstep of the president, but it belongs to the Congress as well, to see the laws go along, the laws and the policies alongside the investments that actually ensure that the money gets to the people, the investments actually get to the people, to the hotspots, to the communities, to the regions, and for the purposes that they were designed to go to. When we see that we have set-asides and that money never gets spent, it just sits there. We see that in housing, we see that in some of the flood preparedness money that we've already received. And so one of the main expectations, one of our great hopes, is to actually see the Congress take the steps to make, to enact legislation that actually forces, and I want to stress that actually forces industry to do the right thing. right? To not allow them to make these decisions and find loopholes and make backroom deals, but to actually force them to begin the process of investing in renewables and abandoning their need to keep building fossil fuel infrastructure, to start to make that transition so that all of us can actually breathe fresh, clean air, drink clean, drinkable water that is affordable, so the investments are wonderful and I'm excited about them, but I actually want to see them I want to see how they will come to fruition on the ground. And the way that we've been going at this for the last several decades, we get great laws. We have great laws, but we don't always have great implementation.
Implementation is key. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's something that all of us have touched upon, all of you all have touched upon, is that this cannot sit at the president's doorstep. This cannot sit at the Congress's doorstep. There has to be implementation on the municipal, the county, the state legislative level as well. And you all have substantial experience working with all of those levels. Dana, can you, if I put you on the spot, can you talk about jobs? Because I feel like we've covered the environmental racism front here, although it can never be covered in a few questions. But I know that you have substantial expertise in talking about jobs and infrastructure building as well. So if we talk about rebuilding and building and rebuilding America's energy, transportation, and manufacturing infrastructure to make it cleaner and make it more environmentally resilient, climate action offers a huge opportunity to create millions of technologically innovative and high-paying and good quality jobs. What can people in Washington, and let's stop saying Washington, what can policymakers do to make sure that we're able to unlock those jobs and those opportunities, and that we're able to do it on an equitable basis so that people who have been historically excluded have an opportunity to participate in a new green economy?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. We knew that this transition was coming. We Act for Environmental Justice and others within the environmental justice movement. And last year, we put out a report that we call the Green Jobs Report. And it talks about ways that we can equitably and justly transition our workforce into a newer, cleaner, greener economy. We think that that starts with, well, we look at it in a holistic way, let me say that. So we believe that there's opportunity at the federal level for resources to be made available to center climate and environmental justice in education. We know we can't, K through 12 education decisions are made at the local and the state level. And so we think that, grants and other resources can be made available to teachers. They can be made to community-based organizations so that they can partner with our educational system to begin to teach about climate and environmental justice and build a future generation of advocates. The next phase in that work, we believe, is investment in minority-serving institutions and historically Black colleges and universities. They already have a framework, the infrastructure that we need. Let's invest in modernizing those campuses. Let's invest in partnerships that will bring industry, that will bring government, that will bring the academic community together. We have programs, we have an environmental justice, health, and leadership training that we believe provides a curriculum and a framework to begin to shape what teaching at this higher level of education can look like. We also have workforce development programs, right? Some folks are already in an economy and will be moving into new career opportunities. Let's provide wraparound services for them. Let's make it possible for people to really engage in the academic training that they need to bring their skill sets up for the new economy. Let's provide services that will support families. So childcare, healthcare. Let's pass legislation that will preserve people's pensions, their retirement benefits as we move into a new economy. And then we've been talking about the Civilian Conservation Corps. We'd love to call it a frontline climate corps. And we like to use it to train the next group of professionals who will come back to communities and work in organizations like We Act, work at IPL, work at LCV to really lead in communities in making our places more healthy, more resilient spaces. And so let's start when they're babies and let's go right on through.
Thank you so much, Dana. We got 4 minutes left and we could talk about this stuff all day. So I want to close with a bit of a rapid fire roundtable. We've spread out the responsibility here and we've made it clear that everyone has a role to play. But oh no, Corey Solo, the White House is not off the hook yet. What is the White House and the Department of Environmental Quality's message to young people, specifically how they can individually become engaged to be a part of the solution? And number two, just spread awareness of the climate crisis. And then I'm gonna let you pass it to whichever of your colleagues that you choose to give us a final word. What is each one of you all's big takeaway? And I want to hear from each of our esteemed panelists on what is the one thing from your personal or your organizational perspective that you want our guests and Congressman McEachin to take away here today. Corey Solo, what is the White House message to young folks?
Thank you so much for the question, Don. And I would be remiss if I didn't at the end of this conversation just say thank you again to the Congressman, his team, and for this outstanding panel for this conversation. I would say that the White House message, my message, is that we're working incredibly hard to make good on the commitments that the president has committed to address environmental injustice, to a whole of government approach to taking care of and addressing the historic inequities that are facing too many communities across our country. And so please know we take very seriously this responsibility. I would say that I'm the first deputy director that CEQ has ever had for environmental justice. My boss, Dr. Cecilia Martinez, is the first senior director for environmental justice at the White House. That to me just shows how seriously we're taking this commitment. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dana.
Sure, thank you. So we believe that Justice 40 is a great opportunity for us to address legacy harms within communities and bring future benefit. We think that oversight and compliance and transparency must be part of the process. And so our final message is community and government must work together at all levels of government in order for this to be effective.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you to We Act, and pass it to one of your colleagues, Dana.
I'm going to pass it to Dr. Harris.
I think I just want people to take away that this is not this is not just a top-down issue, that everybody has a responsibility to take part in the public conversation and public dialogue, that we're still trying to change minds and hearts. But while we're waiting for hearts and minds to change, we have to have the policies that will, kind of usher us into more consciousness related to environmental justice as well as mitigating climate change.
Pass the mic, Reverend.
I'm gonna pass it to Yvonne.
Thanks, Faith. So I think my big takeaway, my message is the time to act is now. We have a big opportunity to take bold action to address the climate crisis, equity issues, recovering from the pandemic. We have a Congress and a presidency administration that is ready and willing to take those steps. And so we need to be pressuring them to make the big investments, take the big action, because now's the time to do it. So, and now off to Sarah.
Just ditto to what all my fellow panelists have said, and I just will add urgency and opportunity and hope. And to all those who are listening, please get engaged. Now is the time to be calling your member of Congress, get engaged. This is the historic opportunity to tackle climate, environmental, and economic injustice. Back to you, Don.
Reverend Dr. Faith Harris, Yvonne McIntyre, Sarah Chifo, Dana Johnson, and Corey Solo. Thank you all so much for being here. Our last word goes to our esteemed host, the gentleman from Virginia, Congressman Donald McEachin.
Well, Don, a big thanks to all of you all, to the panelists, message received. This congressman is absolutely committed to making sure that the monies promised land on the target for the purpose intended. That has got to be our task. I heard you loud and clear. And to all of you all who took the time to listen in, thank you. I hope you got something out of this so that you too will go forward and help us save this wonderful gift that we call the earth. God bless you. Have a good evening.